Isn't that insane? Like how the world has gotten to that, especially at least in this field, in the professional writing and editing field. It's just it's a liability. Like it's a fucking liability to say what you think about a policy, about a
About
fucking
anything, and you have to pretend that this is like his, like, oh, it's always been this way. No, it has not.
right.
You're like, stop, like, I stop acting like this like was something that was written into the style guide or into the company handbook like 40 years ago. It is like this happened like 5 days ago, and you want me to adhere to this nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy, but that's where we are. And that's why I was like, I have to do podcasts like this. At the very least, it could make me lose everything, but then again, I always think like, okay, so they won't give me book deals, they won't give me teaching jobs, they won't give me awards. I'm like, well, I'm already not getting those things. Like they're not going to just
I
give them
mean,
to,
also, like, who
you know.
says that you're not getting? I mean, you will. Is there? I don't think you're blacklisted. I don't
No.
think there's a reason why, yeah, of like why you're not getting certain things,
Right,
except
yeah.
for I think like what we'll get into. I think there's just like a surplus of people, especially after the blogging boom in the 2010s, who were told that anybody could write, that anybody could do it. Um, yeah, like that. In a way, it was kind of true that like all it really took was savvy marketing, like good search engine optimization, any like all you really had to have was media and internet savvy. It did not, or even just like great photography skills, and that was also true. You didn't A lot of these early bloggers weren't really writers at all. They were just
Right.
very, very good at kind of beating Instagram to its game, like early on.
Yeah, and I would, yeah, I mean, I agree with that totally. Yeah, how, yeah, there are good parts where we kind of, yeah, anybody could do it. Anybody could do this now, but it's also the business model itself is drying up and all that. So yeah, I know it comes off when I talk about it sometimes as, yeah, me being more like bitter, or that like I'm thinking that like I'm being blacklisted, or yeah, I don't think that at all. Yeah, out there, listeners, I don't think that at all. I do. I understand it's difficult too. Like I've been trying to get books published the last 4 years, and yeah, it hasn't happened. But like that's normal. Like that's the norm, is trying for years to get your first shit out there. Like it's not just gonna be like, oh, you have a book, well, let's publish it right away. Nobody's gonna do that. Uh, but yeah, I am close. And when you and I have been chatting for a little bit now, and I am reaching that point where I'm close to giving up and being like, well, maybe I should just start like serializing some of the stuff I have on a Substack, or like self-publish it or whatever. And I was like, well, you know who I would hire to edit? It would be Sam. It would be you. Yeah. Well, one, because
That
you're the
you,
only one I know, but like still.
I don't think that's true either, but I'll take the compliment.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy. Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
I would have to
It
use
is.
your services. Yeah.
Oh no, but I will say that so one reason, I'm sure you remember the freak out over Substack in 2021. So Substack now, like whoever I forgot who their director of partnerships is, but whoever they're doing is doing incredible work. They have brought almost every single person who was ever interesting, any sort of like interesting writer, in any genre, like across like not just media, but I think also just like literary, just authors. A lot of them have Substacks now, and I think as somebody, I think like who is it? Is it Sherman Alexie who is like serializing one of his novels on Substack? Like there are quite a few people doing that now. But I think you remember the freak out from a long time ago, and it was just like, oh my God, like it's becoming a hub of fascism because like they will refuse it, like because one of the key tenets was, free speech rules always.
Right.
And, that free speech kind of like freewheeling culture is what produced some of the first Substack pro people, not just, Michael Tracy, who I work for, but Matt Iglesias is one of the only people to kind of like go from the 2000s blogging boom into Substack. Like he went from blogging at Center for for American Progress, Think Progress, to doing what he is now. He was one of the first people offered a deal, and then you had Andrew Sullivan, who, you know, he was at New York Magazine during 2020, treated terribly, was given a deal, I believe. I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of what the freakout was all about. All these people who, you know, they're very talented, more senior colleagues, kind of legitimize their position. Like, it was prestigious to work at a certain outlet because you had someone like a luminary working above you, or you had someone editing you that was just, you know, maybe that's what drew you to the place. But then now, you know, when a lot of those people started migrating over to Substack, they, you know, it was like, oh my God. And like, and I kind of get it, because before it was like, you had these people who would be bringing in all these, like, who would be bringing in revenue, subscriptions for the parent outlet, and they broke off on their own. And then also you had like people like who I work for, just kind of iconoclasts who managed to stay afloat on their own and contribute and build a life for years, like despite all of the backbiting, despite all of the, you know, like maybe he's too controversial, we don't want to publish him. And he has a massive platform. And it's not because, you know, he's a fascist or whatever. It's because like, or you know, and like, yes, I understand that some of these people can like have very spicy takes, but it's not even because of that. He was able to kind of do that because he was doing kind of like what that article said, the Nylon article, even though he's not an it guy or a literary it girl, he was able to, you know, build an audience like from an unusual method, and then use that to springboard into serious journalism.
Yeah. Would you say that like I mean, obviously there's political angles to why people were freaking out about Substack, but would you say it was more like I think the political arguments against Substack were hysteria. The more real reason that people were upset was the business. That was like the last nail in the coffin of like the old business model for magazines and new papers, at least.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, I kind of have a scrambled timeline now, but I think
we all
around
do, Sam. Yeah, we all do. Yeah.
But like at this point, I think like around that time there were, you know, another round of layoffs, and like at maybe HuffPost somewhere, and then another round of layoffs somewhere else. So, you know, while these people who are supposedly, you know, they're publishing wrong speak, they're doing things that you're not supposed to be doing, and all this, and you know, all these people had kind of built brands not off of doing that, but like by being original thinkers for decades. They were like, okay, well, fine. You know, this new company came and they gave me a contract like for a year, and they all left. And then, yeah, I think that's exactly what the freak out was. It's like in a time with all these mass layoffs, like some of these young reporters, some of whom are like, I'm going to enter a word in here, some of whom were woke. You know, they're, you know, like their etiquette that they just kind of like sprung on some of these places, it didn't work anymore. Like they didn't have that power over their senior colleagues anymore. And their work was kind of delegitimized because the people who made those outlets great were leaving. So
yeah, absolutely. And you hear, listeners, you hear the voice of our guest today here, giving us a rundown of what you can expect here as we get into this episode of Heavy Board. And welcome to it. I'm Andrew Wittstadt. And I'm joined today by a special guest, Sam, who's come here to talk about Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And I think we have the same version of this because this book's so popular, right? So whatever I do on the rundown here is I always just like, you know, what version we read, the publisher stuff for the book nerds. Yeah, I got the same one, the kind of mass market paperback. Published by Penguin Books in 2018 originally, right? But this version was published in 2019. And we're going to get into it here today, listeners. And I always like to just kind of start with, you know, your experience with this book, kind of your history with this book or Ottessa or literature in general, you know, just give listeners kind of an overview of, before we even get into the book, really, just like your history of it.
Came out in 2018. I kind of hesitated to buy it. At the time I was living in the New York area. I remember seeing it in the window of McNally Jackson, and like a lot of my friends were reading it, and they were like, you should read it. But I didn't want to because I had read the blurb on the back of the book, and I thought, okay, I'm not ready for this yet. It's a bit too biographical, maybe. So, so like the protagonist in the book, I also spent kind of like, I had a 6-month period of rest and relaxation, you could call it that, on the Upper East Side in Yorkville, maybe a block away from where wherever she lives. And a lot of these, experiences I remember having. I remember just I could see Carl Schurz Park from my window. I could kind of see Roosevelt Island. And I remember like waking up and seeing the Brearley girls go to school and thinking how old I was and just like how ancient. At the time I had taken, I graduated college a little bit later, and I had to take some time off just to kind of deal with a physical disability. At the time I was subletting this place uptown. And I just remember just kind of feeling numb. I had this vision of like, just like scribbling, like writing, like as the sun was pouring into my like white box and that I was renting. And I thought it was going to be like, the start of a new life. And it really was not. It was more like a purgatory time for me to get organized. So I didn't want to read this at the very beginning because I was like, oh God, like I don't want to think about that time when like I was probably not the greatest friend to some of the people who cared about me, or like when I basically was just like, I was sitting there watching like dopey TV shows and like kind of thinking like, oh gosh, like what am I going to do after this? Like I've got 6 months before I go back to school. I can figure things out. So that's my history with it. But then when I finally read it, I was very stunned. Like I was very impressed. I thought that, so something that I kind of get from a lot of these books that take place in New York and they're written by millennial women is there's always, maybe it's because, Ottessa is a very different author. So she has this kind of like deadpan, unembellished prose, and that made me appreciate it, because usually what you get with these is the protagonist kind of like makes it a point to signal something, like either I don't belong of this culture, of this or of this city, or there's some sort of just like waving, like they break the fourth wall somehow, or they like wink at the reader a bit, like like, well, this isn't me, and like she doesn't do that. It's darkly hilarious, and like there's a lot of like she's sending up a certain kind of culture that was present, in the very like late 90s, early 2000s, but it's just not in your face. And I think that that's what makes it different from a lot of the books released during this time.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel the same way. And we were chatting a little bit about, and I want to get to this, about how this book was kind of a breath of fresh air reading it compared to like all the other kind of contemporary novels and stuff that come out. And regular listeners to this will know that I do not keep up with the latest and greatest kind of stuff that comes out. It's just too much for me. So like if something gets a reputation and then I'm like, okay, I'm interested, so I only knew the book by reputation as like, this is Ottessa's big hit. This is her big kind of, she had a couple books before this, but this was her big kind of like breakthrough into the mainstream and all that, and everybody talking about her book and her stories, and made her career, I guess you could say, although she had a career before this. But yeah, so I only knew it from reputation. And then, the next question is usually, how did it read for you? Just impressions.
I mean, it was, I reread it again before coming on here, and I forgot how just like delightful it is, and just how close that she truly understands, like I don't want to say that she experienced it, but she understands that feeling of kind of like being numb, being in purgatory. Like just even like the prose is very like just on the page. It was a very easy read. It was a smooth read. And it, these days I feel like there's a lot of just kind of, I like purple prose. It takes me out of writing. Like it's overly descriptive. This was just like, I was very like within like the first couple of chapters or like first couple of pages or like, I was right there, like in the protagonist's, like, badly decorated apartment, like on that Pottery Barn couch, the sweat stains, like with like videos going in the background.
Yeah, and I will say, I guess it's uniquely millennial in that way, even though I guess it's talking about a time. I guess there were some millennials that were approaching like their 20s at the new millennium.
Where the generation starts. It starts in 1981, and then it ends with My year. No, a year after me, 1994.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like, yeah, and I mean, it does capture something. And I guess the Gen Xers did this too. Like the Gen X writers that were the first ones to kind of talk about that numbness, the kind of disappointment in the things you're not supposed to be disappointed in, like the things you're supposed to be excited about and like looking forward to, and you should be happy, right?
Association.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just so it's interesting that the last two generations that are, or at least that are adults now, and I guess Gen Z is just becoming these adults here. We're the ones that felt this. Like you never saw like boomers or the silence being like, "Oh, I'm miserable because everything's just boring." It was like, "I'm miserable because I'm in poverty or because of the Great War or like whatever it is, or Vietnam or something." But like here, it's just like, everything's great and I'm bored. Like it's very
Like
unique. Yeah, sorry.
it
Go on.
is. No, no, no. I was going to say, I don't even think like it's very clear that it isn't just because she's bored. It's because that like she was expecting meaning out of things, especially after kind of having this, I guess tough childhood where there wasn't much of anything. Like she had all of the status markers, and she had just kind of like her best friend Reva says, like she has all this stuff that's supposed to make her happy, but she's not, because I mean at the time I think like it kind of symbols or symbolizes the beginning of a zeitgeist in a decade. That was kind of the complaint about the 2000s, right? That it was like raunch culture and everything was superficial and plasticky, and like the entire zeitgeist was kind of like a bright pink, like a hot pink, like the cover, not a millennial
Right.
pink. Like it was a very it was a different time. Like when people kind of like reminisce on the 2000s now, like my siblings who wear Y2K stuff, or they talk about, like, of course they don't remember because they were born in the 2000s. I think that like they forget like why we landed in our wretched decade now. It's because, no, really, because for a long time, I think especially like leading up to 2008, like that was the complaint from everyone. Like everything is too superficial. Everything is just kind of like hard and like shellac. Like if you hit something, it will bounce back at you. It was very much like no one like had any regard for the future, and like the past is just like an afterthought. Everyone was just kind of like going. It was a very materialistic decade. I think that she kind of captures that very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, without like being obvious about it, but you just kind of you see like how like these people who were born in the early 80s, how they came of age. I think this is something like we didn't experience.
Yeah, because I guess at the year this takes place, it takes place from like 2000 to 2001, basically, right? Like, and I guess for me, I would have been in middle school at that time, like 11, 12. The 9/11, I was in sixth grade. Miss Magar's English class when the towers went down, and then they made the announcement, like all that. But yeah, I mean, and I think there's some confusion about it now too. Hindsight's, it's always easier to look back and like, oh, that decade had a lot of numbness to it, even though we kind of are nostalgic for it now, just because everything's so censorious or oppressive in certain ways, and it's unique ways that they're doing that it is in this culture now, but. It is like, I think, she's not the first writer to write about that period. Or maybe she was like the first to get a huge, big, popular book from it in recent years. But there's a couple now that I've noticed, like a couple books that have come out recently that are about that year, like the 1999 to like 2001 era. Like people are just like really nostalgic for that time right now. And I guess it's okay. It's 20 years removed, so it makes sense that it's coming back a little bit with trends and things like that. But yeah,
it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I think that might be another. I think I talked about this recently with a friend. Like a lot of what's happening then is sort of happening now, except that we don't like have the same distractions or even culture now. Like if I were Generation Z and we're about to approach a war, maybe, and we're seeing the phrase "axis of evil" pop up again, I would want what we had then versus what we have now. I would want, the auto-tuned pop music and less internet, less social media, so you're not seeing all of this play out all the time.
Right.
I would want just kind of that. I wouldn't just call it carefree, but just I don't know what you would call it. Someone called it just like unhinged capitalism, but that just sounds pretentious and weird. But I guess just like a sort of materialism and like apolitical environment that just, shadowed over all of this.
Yeah. And I always point to social media, I guess, being the thing. I guess that's the big thing people are reaching, but it's hard to write about this time right now. It's hard. So if she were to set this in present day or, a couple years ago, it's really hard to write about, maybe because of what we're living through being so absurd and so obsessed with, like the political angle first and foremost on all fronts, which is really the issue. And that's, most listeners to this know, like, I come at it from that angle, whereas I'm like, the politics isn't necessarily the problem. It's the emphasis on politics that's the problem. It's the putting that before anything else, whether we're talking about visual art, literary art, like any movies, TV shows. That's a forced framework that I'm just desperate to get everybody to see, to be like, we don't have to put the politics first. Like, always exceptions for books that are explicitly political, that if it's written into the book or it's in the project or the art piece, of course you have to talk politics, but it just, it becomes first and foremost, and it makes it so that everybody's a little on edge, and it's the tension. It's the tension that everybody feels right now. It's the main source of any disagreement right now is political, and it's just, and especially in the writing world, I think people like to deny it. They like to pretend it's not as bad as it is. Whereas like we're in full blown Red Scare territory, basically, like, and we've been there for a few years now. Like, but I guess the good news is we do see it kind of shifting away a little bit. And I think writers like Ottessa are part of the reason that's happening, because she's just consistently refused to engage with that kind of stuff and just be like, no, I don't have to engage with politics first. I'm going to do the writing first, the story first. And then, people can say what they say. And just having a big writer, a big, great American writer saying that over and over again and not budging, even though she's, she's like hardline on it or anything. She's never been like, I refuse, but just casually doing it, just the way she does it. Like, we need that. We need good American writers to just not do it, just not participate in the politics first and just do their thing. And the more that happens, the more we're going to see, I like to think that we're going to start moving away from this bullshit and get to, more people like Ottessa writing more books like this that are great and fun and cool and a little bit edgy, a little bit provocative. Like, this used to be the norm. And I said to you when we were chatting, and I said in the beginning of this episode, listeners, like, it was refreshing to read this book. It felt like I was reading a book from like 20, 30 years ago almost. Like, that was my first impressions, like first couple chapters. I'm like, whoa, this thing feels like it's from another era. And I get she's setting it in the 20 years ago, but it's like, this is how books always used to be. They always used to be a little bit funny, a little bit edgy, a little bit provocative, maybe a little racy in some scenes, some hot sex scenes or whatever people like get uneasy about or whatever. And it just used to be the norm, and everybody just knew that novels were supposed to be this. They were supposed to be refreshing, provocative, interesting, titillating in these weird, almost even taboo ways. And it was okay because it's just a book it's just words on a page. It's just a fucking book. And like, this is how we get so that we just do this. And I think the fact that she's just did it unapologetically is just great. And she deserves all her praise, listeners, Sorry, I've been talking for a while. Yeah.
Well, I was just agreeing with what you said. It's very raw, and I think one other thing that maybe people are not used to, I noticed this, is it's kind of detached. People might disagree with that interpretation, but I think what we've had maybe for almost 10 years, 8 years, and it was brought about maybe by Lena Dunham and Girls. I'm not sure, but
I really like that. Yeah, I like that.
What?
The idea that it might have Lena Dunham and Girls changed the detachment. Sorry, keep going, but I'll follow up.
No, for sure. So, but yeah, I think what happened is they saw that, and then all of a sudden, just oversharing about everything became the norm, especially even in literature, like even in just fiction. All of a sudden, like, it wasn't just online confessionals or like fun kind of gross out BuzzFeed articles. It wasn't just that anymore. Lena Dunham, I guess, found a way to intellectualize that, but I think a lot of people didn't realize that that's just who she is, the person. Like that's just what her work has always been like, because that's what who she is. Um, so that's what really kind of struck me. Usually, I feel like this would be like a full blown confessional, and like she would just be like, if someone from if Lena wrote this, or if any like one of the crop of other kind of contemporary fiction writers wrote this book, I think you would get that more. You would get it would be a lot sloppier and warmer, maybe. It wouldn't be cool and detached. And like, there's a part where she's describing, I mean, like every time that she describes going into her like sleep hypnotist, basically, it's just completely like, you feel like she's watching herself do it. It's very clinical. It's very like, it's very crisp and deadpan and just like unadorned. And I can't remember the last time I read anything like that.
Right.
Right.
And just like the detachment, like you were mentioning, like we've already said it's very millennial. Yeah, it is. And then I think the comparison to girls is accurate. It's important, I think. And I everybody says this, especially in some of the circles, that we hang out in and stuff. Some of the circles that like how we got to know each other were just, everybody's obsessed with girls, and for good reason. It was a very pivotal show, and I remember watching it when it was airing and loving it. And Dunham captured that millennial ethos, like to the men and women. Like people think, oh, it's just girls because, it was the five main characters were all like this group of friends, but like the boyfriends, like they captured the, like Adam Driver, captured the kind of quirky New York like millennial boy. It kind of just. It captured what everybody was doing, this oversharing. And like you said, it's confessional in the kind of the tradition of confessional poetry and literature that we've had for, like almost 100 years now, listeners. But it's like, it does make it, it's not just that. It's not just like this kind of secrets, or she's telling some deep, dark secret or whatever. She's like you said, almost removed from it in a way to where it's, like the character's almost judging herself too, like as you're reading through the narrator in the fictionalized version. I know, like we do poetry and fiction on this podcast. I know the poets that listen to this know that it's a taboo to assume that the speaker is the writer, right? Like where the narrator is the writer. So poets are well versed in that. But I know fiction, there's this tendency to always be like, well, it's the writer. She's writing exactly about herself, and it's like, well. Not exactly, right? Like she's a little removed from it, and we don't know. Maybe there's pieces that were biographical, but we don't know, And it's bad to assume it, but yeah. There's the first thing I stood out was because it opens on and about her like kind of job in the art world, right? Like the New York visual art scenes, to be specific, listeners, and it's kind of always been a ripe area for satire in literature. Like you go back like several decades and everybody's kind of talking about like how kind of stupid and ridiculous it is, and all these rich people that have no taste and are just spending millions on like garbage art. And Sam's nodding along and she's like, yeah, I lived it, bro. yeah absolutely. And just like one of the descriptions on page 33, first full paragraph on page 33 there, which she's just kind of describing the art cowards that like the main character is disgusted by. And
I don't know if that's 33 in mine. On 33 in mine, she's talking about, and this is what I actually really appreciated, because I feel like she's the only person to do this honestly and without any sort of like trace of resentment. She's talking about lit bros with air quotes. Like, I feel like this is a trope that I constantly gets rehashed every 4 months about David Foster Wallace and these guys. And I'm just going to say it. Do I like these guys? Absolutely not. I do not like these guys. This is the first time that someone has actually said, or given a valid reason for them. It's not just like, oh God, like they're just so pretentious. But they're like, he walked in wearing like a beanie and carrying infinite. Like, instead of just like having this image or like just a trope that people haven't experienced, I feel like most people who complain about these guys have never actually, experienced these guys. They just know that they're supposed to dislike these guys. You have this brilliant paragraph, like a brilliant graph in the middle of the page.
It's totally true. And the part I was going to read was just that first two sentences.
Please do it.
The worst was that those guys tried to pass off their insecurity as sensitivity, and it worked. They would be the ones running museums and magazines, and they'd only hire me if they thought I might fuck them. And I was just like laughing to this because it does capture that scene, that the insecurity as sensitivity is one of the most, like, I guess I'll call it a truism, because like it captures that kind of, as someone who was a former sad art boy kind of, or that's, you know, teen years to early 20s coming into this scene, she captures it. She knows Tessa's been around these people, and like, yeah, like you can just, there's something fake about it always. There's something that's like a little bit performative, and it's all about this kind of deep-seated insecurity and blah blah blah, you know, whatever, but yeah.
That's why she even says why, and I think it's because I think a lot of these guys, it's not just for the love of books, it's not just for the love of art. They kind of form their identities in opposition to someone else, who they always kind of see as their permanent antagonist. And she says that on the page before it. I'll read from it actually.
Yes, please.
Yeah. All right. So I think in the middle of the page, an alternative to the mainstream frat boys and pre-med straight and narrow guys, these scholarly, charmless, intellectual brats dominated the more creative departments. As an art history major, I couldn't escape them. Like, yes, I think, yeah. Dudes reading on the subway, reading Proust, reading David Foster Wallace, jotting down their brilliant thoughts in a black moleskin pocket notebook. Beer bellies and skinny legs, zip-up hoodies, navy blue peacoats, and army green parkas. Like,
it's incredible.
It's the first time when I've seen the trope, and it's like, you know that it isn't born out of resentment or even, you know, and it's every time I hear someone complain about these guys, it's like, I don't think you've actually experienced this. I don't think you've been on a date with one of these guys. I don't even think you've been in a workshop with one of these guys. I think you just know that you're supposed to dislike them. She gets it. Like, she knows why I think the original trope came around. Yeah. You know,
And that hits. It does hit because it hits that truism, that little bit of that kernel of truth that we always seeking in fiction and things like that. Yeah, like, and it kind of even describes, you know, I bring up Lindy Man stuck culture or whatever. It does describe this kind of stuck, like, because this same person still exists. They're still reading the same books on the subway, right? Like, they're still trying to pass off their insecurity as sensitivity, you know, like they're still trying, they're, like she says, that one, afraid of their own dicks, afraid of themselves. And it does capture a certain millennial male psyche, I think, where there is these levels of insecurity that nobody talks about because, you know, there's a bunch of reasons for that, I guess, but it is kind of, there's a uniquely male insecurity wrapped up in that. I think that she's just putting her finger on in this nice long description that you heard Sam read and I read parts of it. It's a couple paragraphs here, just a great section there in that chapter. The fact that the navy blue peacoats in that article that came out, we're recording this on October 26th, listeners, and that article that came out, I guess, was it a couple weeks ago now, maybe a week ago, with the David Foster Wallace. It was just another one of the, basically, David Foster Wallace sucks and the men who like him suck, and it almost seems like they lifted it out of this chapter, the navy blue peacoat specifically, because it was referenced in that latest DFW piece, and everyone was just like, who even wears navy blue peacoats anymore?
We're at the point where, I mean, I will say that, I mean, there's a word for this, and I'm not, but it seems like all of these tropes are now just like being strung together and revived by people who know nothing else. Like, I have seen, you know, people kind of act this out, like, you know, would-be lit bros who haven't read David Foster Wallace. Like, things are a little bit different now in English programs and MFA programs. Like, I don't know what they'd be wearing. I don't know, like some like hype East brand hoodie maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. But, you know, I'm thinking of like a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old here, someone about my brother's age. But it just seems like, again, like, I do think they might have lifted this. Like, they know that there's someone, like some of these like women who are on Book Top writing these articles that they're supposed to hate, or someone who they're supposed to define themselves in opposition to, and like, who better than these guys? And I do get it. It's just that, you know, the guy has changed and evolved a bit, and I think that the literary landscape, which people say is very female dominated now, and it is, I think a lot of it actually kind of came about because of these guys. I don't think it was entirely down to some of the women in publishing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think there is, like, people tend to forget that too, because we are so many years removed from maybe like the turn of the century there, but there's always a reaction. There's a reason people are reacting. Even now, you see people reacting. Like, it's not usually because of nothing, although sometimes it is now with social media and the propaganda that gets spread everywhere. But like, yeah, it's always a reaction. There's something that causes, for every action, there's equal opposite reaction, right? Like, there's just something that happens, and this is true for culture, trends in publishing, writing, art making. Like, there's always a reaction. I'm going on a podcast tomorrow. Somebody asked me on to talk about, it's nerdy poetry stuff, but like, and we're going to, he prepped me on basically what we're going to go into is, these kind of evolution of trends throughout. And how the novel affected poetry basically in the 20th century and all that, and how people write it. It's just a reaction, like people rejecting the generation before them, like rejecting, like the boomers rejecting the modernists and stuff, and the, that era and the silent generation. And yeah, it's just normal part of it. And there is that kind of reaction to that was the dominant presence at the time in the early 2000s, was that David Foster Wallace loving, mostly male, even though it was starting to become more female and more parody at that time in the industry, it was still dominated by that type of guy. And then obviously there was a huge reaction that lasted a decade or two to that. But I always say, like, my friend who I've had on this podcast before, shout out to Lee, listeners, go listen to Lee Madeline's episode here and buy her book. She loves DFW, and she always talks about this because she's a huge fan, and she's a woman that's a huge fan of him. And she always kind of rolls her eyes at those articles that come out every 4 or 5 months. I'll send her a text whenever they come out, and we'll chat about it a little bit. And she's, she's just saying, like, people, when she lived in New York and was working in publishing, she always told on that episode, listeners, go listen to it. She was saying that, like, everyone around her at the publishing house and stuff were like, oh my God, avoid guys like that just bring up DFW on a date, and that's all they want to talk about. And she just said, like, that never happened to her. Like, she's like, I don't think I ever sat across the table from a guy on a date where that happened. She's like, but for some reason, everyone around me was acting as if this happened all the time. And this was like, I think by the time she was doing that was like 2010, 2011, like in New York and the kind of the publishing scene. And she was just like, I don't know, like, is it an older trope that still exists, or I guess is what I'm getting at, or if it's even fucking real, is it just like a fake thing at this point? Or like you said, with the kind of it's kind of a revival here where people are starting to get this kind of dude bro, they call it, or bro lit, or whatever phrase you want to use. There's starting to be a little bit more of a revival of that, because it's been 20 years of reaction against that, and now it's like, okay, of course it's going to go in cycles. But yeah, really good point, Sam. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to like start chatting, but yeah, this is why Sam came on. Yeah.
No, I agree with everything you said. I think that's a good point. But I also was going to say that I don't know who David Foster Wallace was, forming a reaction to, because sometimes when I read people and they talk about the publishing industry, I'm just like, what was I reading? I think it was like a Lit Hub piece or maybe a Book Riot piece, and it was from a long time ago. But it was they were talking about, like, as if it were still maybe like the late mid-century, like when they were talking about it being an old boys club, and I was like, okay, so I can think of James Wiley, or is that his name? It's not Robert, it's Andrew Wiley. Sorry, yes. So we've got one geriatric on deck. Like who are the other who is left from this culture of like St. Paul's to the Ivy League to the publishing house? I want to know who these people are that are apparently among us, because I cannot think of one person who wasn't gone, forced out, retired. I don't know what they're talking about, but I do think that those people who did exist, that might be who these quote unquote like these lit bros are reacting to. They wanted to have a different, and then also, I mean, I do think that sure, David Foster Wallace had some problematic elements, but a lot of these writers, and I think this is what's also new and like why things are sterile, a lot of writers aren't upstanding citizens. Like we're kind of, any artist is not. Like it isn't until recently that you had this, and I think it was Tina Fey or maybe it was Amy Poehler who said it. A lot of like guys in their I guess in their era who went into comedy, they were like Norm Macdonald, or like they were like quote unquote like fail sons. They kind of like drifted around. They were edgy, they were angry, they had a large chip on their shoulder, and comedy was sort of their outlet. And then meanwhile, the the women who went into comedy, they were always great citizens, like kind of, Tina Fey called herself like a drug-free, achievement-oriented virgin, adult virgin. Like they were great daughters. They made dean's list every semester. They were kind of like they were very goody-goody and almost uptight, and like comedy was their way to let loose. And I think that's the thing. Like, I see this trend remarked on a lot. Like Megan McArdle, who works for the Washington Post, said that and you kind of see it a bit here in Ottessa's book. Like the protagonist gets into Columbia by writing like.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
This unreadable essay about like it's just like a bad prompt about I think like technology and art. I forgot the name. I have to go back into the book, but it was like very unreadable. It sounded almost like some of the semiotic work that came out during that time. And that was the path that Megan McArdle said she took. She was like, I wasn't a straight A kid. I wasn't like I had a high SAT score, but I was an underachiever. And I was too busy writing opinion columns for my local newspaper and, slacking off to do homework. And I got into Penn anyway, and like right. It wasn't, and like her parents weren't particularly rich. They weren't donor class people. But I think, she clearly is a brilliant person, and she managed to kind of like make her career just through writing. And I think like you see that in the protagonist too. It's like I like walked my way into Columbia. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And I think like that also, I mean, people say, and I think in a way that is good. Like I think meritocracy is good, but I think that's also what kind of brought us this new class of writers and artists who are maybe more like what Tina and Amy say they were, like very just like, great, like upright, uptight people right. who like let loose through comedy and really found their voices through comedy or like through another dimension or like through art. They were a different kind of person.
Absolutely. And there is that, and it's become more in the discussion like the last 100 years basically, or last 50, 70 years with class and writers and all that, and how it affects people be like, oh, if you're a lower class person or you were raised lower class, your family had less money for education and all these things, like, kind of the striver class of people, upper middle class to middle class to upper class. And it just, they're telling me how the lower classes have a harder time getting in. And that's true. But it is also like, it's a recent thing. As I always like to say, like people look back at the canon and be like, oh, well, all these people were wealthy with trust funds. It's like, yes, they were, because before like 1950, like industrialization, if you didn't have a trust fund, like if you weren't from a rich family or something, you didn't have time to sit around and contemplate life and write these like modernist style texts. Like they were all wealthy from wealthy families because nobody had time. They were like working their ass off, to survive. And more recently, you could be getting in from a lower class, but it's still the same thing. Like it's still the same. Who buys the most books? Well, the middle, upper classes. Like that's who buys the most books. And it just, I don't know. I guess they're just. My point is just that it's always looked at the wrong way when you start twisting these kind of classes as to who's allowed to write about books or characters or different classes of people or anything like that. But you also made a good point about that kind of the anger that these, particularly the Gen X and I think millennial and even I think Zoomers, although it's very repressed in Zoomers here, the anger that a lot of young men have, and it's for no reason. Like there's no good reason for young men to be that angry, but they are. And I remember it very well when my phase of it came through. It's those teenage years into your early 20s. You are incredibly pissed, and there's no reason for it, like usually, but it's just, I don't know why. And then you find these different things. So I heard a few smart people talking about, the kind of new metal when we were growing up, the kind of corns, the stuff that was coming out, all that kind of rap metal, very angry. Teenage boys loved it, right? Because it was just a place for them to go in and they could just mosh or something, like push people around, and it was fine. It wasn't like a destructive thing. Although I guess some people did get hurt in those pits. There's always the horror stories of those concert pits. You never want to wear flip flops to one of those. You get a broken toe. I remember I was at a Modest Mouse. This is completely unrelated. I was at a Modest Mouse show once, and I love Modest Mouse is my favorite band. Like I fucking worship Isaac Brock. Although I admit their last couple albums, they've fallen off. They're almost 50 now. They're old, but
no, but I love them too, and I listened to them religiously for a long time. Yes.
Yeah, and they were playing a set, and this was actually in DC. I was at 930 Club in DC because I was still living in Baltimore at the time. And I went with a bunch of friends and my wife. We weren't married at the time, but we were dating still at that time. And it was like all these people, they started playing dance hall. And so I went nuts and started dancing around. That's only like a 40-second like little thing they were doing on stage. And then everybody around me, this one guy's like, "Oh, I'm in flip-flops, man. Like, come on, blah, blah." And I just stopped. And I looked at him. I was like, I was a little drunk. I was like, "I don't give a fuck." I was like, "Get in the back. Get in the back if you have flip-flops on, you motherfucker." Like, and I guess I'm a little intimidating when I'm like talk to people when I was like drunk.
No, for sure. Yeah.
But and he just kind of shut up after that. I was like, "Yeah, don't fucking talk to me, bitch. Like your fucking flip-flops. Oh, my toes."
How old were you? When was
this?
It's
probably like 24, probably.
Okay.
Almost like 10 years ago, yeah. Just a dumb, angry kid. Yeah, that just like, "Don't you fucking tell me anything. Get out of my face." But yeah,
it's just like a Modest Mouse concert, like of all things. I think I just have other, I guess, albums of theirs in my head. Like you mentioned them, it's been such a long time. Even though I do love them, and I thought randomly of like, Wild Packs of Family Dogs or like something like
so
that.
Important.
To mosh. I was like, what? Like what are they moshing to? Like, of course it would be what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I was.
And some of their earlier stuff, like before that, before the Moon in Antarctica, when they had that really kind of Seattle grungy punk influence to it, they were just kind of lo-fi 4-track recorders in a shed in that trailer park. Yeah, they have some more like kind of punky shit to mosh to. But
speaking of like what we were talking about with, I guess, like stereotypes being reified, I saw somebody the other day, like kind of one of the same kind of people who like to talk about Lit Rose talking about Modest Mouse, and I laughed. I had to admit, it was like you can really tell when Modest Mouse stopped doing heroin. Like that's why the last couple albums were so bad. I was like, oh god,
yeah. And I'm a millennial, so I didn't even when the first couple albums dropped in like 97 or whatever, like I wasn't listening to them then. I was like 8 years old. Like I wasn't listening to indie experimental rock, but and I came to it later. So like people shit on them for the Good News for People Who Love Bad News, the Float On, and then the We Were Dead. But like those are the first 2 albums I came to, and I fucking love them. Like I think they're great. Like, and even that, it has a little bit of that apathy to it. It has a little bit of that kind of Gen X millennial kind of numbness to like a lot of those lyrics, a lot of those songs, a lot of the kind of, even this is the weird experimental stuff. And they weren't the only band doing that, but they did become like kind of the most mainstream that did that. But yeah, I'm glad Modest Mouse got brought up. I say listeners guest, when you're a guest on here, just bring up everything that I love. Yeah, Modest Mouse, Vonnegut.
I'm glad to hear that you're a fan. It's just funny, like what they, I guess for me, because I was younger than you were, like when they came out or like when I started listening to them, it was usually in conjunctions with bands of their polar opposites. Like OAR would be on the playlist next to Modest Mouse, like you hear like some like absolute, I think like it'd be like some very reflective song that maybe was like off of one of their other albums, not Good News, but like So Much Beauty and Dirt. It'd be that next to like, what's that song? Like that was a crazy game of poker where it's like a 7-minute cut of like, and I said, Johnny, what you doing? Like, it would be next to that. It was like, right next to Modest Mouse, which was experimental rock kind of grunge. You'd have this preppy band that came out same like what that
Right.
kind of emerged or like became popular at the same time that they went mainstream. So they were grouped under that for some strange reason.
And I know Modest, just because of
That
the Seattle, they got grouped in with like Elliott Smith and stuff when they were coming out, like this kind of, for some reason, like it was just all this scene was being, it was very, I guess maybe that's why people are nostalgic for it. We're talking about the kind of turn of the millennium. Modest Mouse was dropping albums. Elliott Smith was dropping his albums, like these kind of huge icons in the music scene that are still huge. And just, yeah, maybe that's it. Just subconsciously, I associate that time with like the Elliott Smith and the Modest Mouse and then all the pop that was coming out that was very rock focused before we switched to the electronic music. I think like even Madonna's hits, Britney's hits, all these pop stars, they all had the kind of a like old school rock pop kind of aspect to them before it started to transition, and maybe that's part of the nostalgia too. I don't know, but
like those songs were just so, I mean, that kind of, I've heard like that bubblegum kind of, I've heard people call it bitchy pop. And it's like, I feel like that's almost disappeared. Like sometimes I think maybe like Rihanna put out some bitchy pop, maybe like a couple albums ago, or like maybe like 2013, like whatever that album of hers was, with like Cake on it. I think that was probably like her bitch, or no, it was Loud. That was her bitchy pop album, maybe. But people kind of miss that, like that kind of just, I think at the time the critique was like, oh, this isn't even music, like it's meaningless, it's just like something bass and I can hear the auto tune. And I think like that kind of is what people needed during a time when, after 9/11 and we were at war and you didn't want things to be just like to feel everything. If you were someone who read like Matt Taibbi back then, and this is why I laugh at people's depiction of him now, you were probably, you were a freak. You like nobody
right.
else is doing that, at least in my area. Like you were like, kind of numbing yourself. You were nodding along to like these auto-tune songs in your car. Maybe you were listening to Modest Mouse and whatnot, but then you were probably also reading Taibbi. Like
Yeah.
there was a distinct subculture that all that was a part of. And the mainstream culture, like the monoculture, was very, it was not serious. It was not
Right.
intellectual. That was the critique everybody had. It was mass produced. It was Howard Stern talking about like making borderline like sexual, I don't know, almost sexually harassing people on air, but nobody cared. Like
Right.
right.
Yeah, I like that you bring up Taibbi too. Are you a big Taibbi?
I mean, I've always read him, and I'd say that I definitely am a fan of his. But it's just very funny to see. He was one of the very first people to start writing on Substack.
Right.
And yeah, and I actually have I haven't interacted with him before, but he was, I think like his reporting, like he was like one of the few like gonzo journalists who to really do it in the modern era.
Right.
Like his Rolling Stone reporting really defined that. And now I think a lot of the people who now slam him are trying to, they're trying to replicate that. They're trying to copy that. But they don't have the element that he had at the time. I don't even think he has that element anymore. It's just a very different, the culture has switched. What are you pushing back against now when so-called counterculture is mainstream and nerdy, like different people took it over. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I like that you say that too. Like the nerdiness. My favorite Taibbi era is the pre-Rolling Stone era. And again, I wasn't reading it at the time because I was too young, but like I give my students this essay almost every year here. I do change it up, but his one about why sports are for losers that he wrote for like Men's Journal, in like 2004 or something, like 2002 or something. And he was writing for all those men's magazines, and he's writing about like how hot Anna Kournikova is and like all that. Like it was just great stuff. And I always give my students that one, to why sports are for losers, because it usually gets quite a reaction, from the men, especially in the room, the kind of who, it's always interesting. You see a student, especially a male student, that would not very interested, they're going through the class, but they're not like, passionate or anything. And then you give them that Taibbi essay kind of, it's usually around the third essay, I'll give it to them, and the reactions that you'll see them light up a little bit, usually because they want to argue against it. They want to say, well, I like, baseball, or I like basketball, I was like, yeah, tell me more. Like they get kind of animated about it. I'm like, yeah, only Taibbi could. And, Taibbi's a huge sports guy, loves sports. And then, but he just wrote this great kind of piece, 25 years ago, and it still holds up. It's great. Yeah. Hard to find, though. I have to like keep a PDF of it because like the old website or something, like the archives, you have to go through like.
To me, I don't have it. Like I used to have like one of the first issues of N+1, here in like my little like apartment. I don't have that anymore. Yeah, please send me that PDF. I'd love to have that just in the archives.
Yeah, I know you and I chatted about N+1 before too. You've mentioned N+1 and just kind of when you and I were chatting and we're just kind of lamenting the state of literary magazines and things like that, and yeah, like how important those kind of magazines like N+1 were, and at that era too, like at that era where the first internet magazines were starting to pop up, and with that the literary magazines, and fuck yeah. Shit, we're going so far off of it too, but
there's a way to circle it back. In fact, I was just thinking about it.
Please.
Like, when my year of rest and relaxation talks about, Dupont, the art gallery, of course, like you were saying, like, it's like ripe for satire. It's such a, like, it's like, oh my God, like I know these people, I've lived it. But at the same time, you can kind of see that, there was a bit, if it didn't work out there, like if she didn't go into like her, year of sleeping, either there was something of value produced, or like there was always a new gallery or a new venture being started. Like at that point, the city, it wasn't like, even after like Bloomberg became mayor and like I was too young, I didn't live this, but I think what's like kind of missing now is when, people are like, oh, like in like New York used to have a scene. It's like, well, okay. And like, it used to always have violent crime. I was like, okay, so this is a little bit different. There's crime now, but then it's also expensive. And then also the scene is gone and dispersed. So it's,
right.
You can't really just like write it off and be like, oh, this is just, one drawback to living here and being part of a creative community, because everything's dispersed. I think like the 2000s is when that kind of started, not just like, people being dispersed, but then also it was a time of opportunity. Like things were popping up everywhere on the internet. There was N+1. If this gallery and the book shut down, there'd be a new one next week. Right. Or a lot of, and like she goes to that party on the Lower East Side, and she kind of talks about who she saw. And like even though the people there sound superficial, you kind of know that they aren't like that wacko. I mean, the guy that she ends up giving her keys to and like letting him do things. It turns out that he was an artist, even though he just wanted to shock people and get a superficial reaction. Like he was at least putting in the effort, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. The way that they like kind of the fakeness of it and the how you can use that to your advantage too. Like that's something I've actually picked up on in the internet era too, here with this podcast, and just, trying to market it and send shit out, and just not that you're trying to shock people, but just the kind of like you have to make that effort to market yourself. However, you do have to be a little bit conscious of how that's going to play out when you're marketing yourself, in these, how that's going to play into your reputation. And I'm already noticing things now where people are like, oh, well, you like that a lot. And I was like, I don't, but I guess because I talked about it like, 3 or 4 episodes in a row. So people are, oh, well, you're obsessed with this. And I'm like, well, I'm not, but whatever. But yeah, I do want to hit beauty, especially the theme of beauty, because I think it's very important in this novel, especially like this type of kind of like careless or effortless beauty, right? Like this kind of, and then like kind of gearing that towards how it's like an asset and a burden, maybe. Or yeah, what do you think?
You're quite like, you're spot on. And in a way, like what she's talking about here, like right now we have this kind of resurgence of quiet luxury, or, and I think what's really funny is that I hate the term generational wealth. I think it's vulgar. I think it reminds me of a lot of socioeconomic class, where people take it out of context because they feel, they feel uncomfortable or they feel insecure talking, like using, I guess, like a more like using vernacular, or just saying like he's middle class, she's working class. They have to talk about, so like, place it in like, oh no, but because of her income and then also her social, like they have to pull on terms of sociology. But I think that, it's both an asset and a burden. And here it kind of shows that, like, Riva is constantly trying to keep up. And she's doing as much as she can. I think that like, that's something I related to that heavily. But I think people are always trying to chase down, especially in the literary world, and just like this, when you saw it in that Lit It Girls article,
Right.
like this effortless idea. And I think after like a whole era of oversharing and, confessional pieces and books, it's starting to kind of come back into fashion. Like this is what people were reacting to before, I think, with Lena Dunham style stuff. That's why I was like, oh, like you took something different from my point. Like they didn't like the idea of these, it girls being aloof and kind of withdrawn. Even like you don't see Ottessa or Emma Klein or any of these superstars, like great writers, wade into culture war nonsense ever.
Right.
Like you don't see them, you don't see like right now, like they are partnering, like I think Ottessa partnered with a couple of fashion labels that were very, sleek and understated. They're trying, like their brand building looks very different. And I think it's not even about, quote unquote generational wealth. I think it's the idea of putting forth an effortless facade where people might assume that about you, like to succeed now, to become one of those. And yes, I do think it's like both a burden and both an asset. And it sounds like for this protagonist, it was like, I don't know if she's as pretty as she thinks she is, like maybe she is, but it also sounded like, it sounded like this is someone who was just like very withdrawn, and because she was gorgeous, like she assumed that was why.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
There is that, yeah, and I always talk about this. I always use the professional sports example, but it is, it's true for, I think, beauty and like being put together at the same time, where people don't like to see the effort part of it. They like to see it. It's sexy when it looks like you didn't try. But like in real, so as like professional sports people are like, oh, it looks easy, but like that's incredibly hard. And these people have been working for decades to be able to do that with their bodies, like, and it just,
yeah.
But it looks effortless when you're watching it, and you're like, oh yeah, it's kind of like a show too. Like when you're watching a play or whatever, you don't see the part that took months, putting the sets together, the actors doing the scenes over and over again, the work that it takes, the effort. We just see the after, the work after all that effort, the beauty after all that effort. And then we're like, oh, you don't even have to try to be beautiful. How dare you? And then we hate them for it, like, oh, they don't deserve it or something. But that is, I think it's also very our generation, right? Like this kind of, like even now, the discourse, right? It's always about who's hot, right? Like the social media changed things to where people can say, everybody gets to tell you what they think right away in real time. And that includes, they get to say, ad hominem or talk about your appearance in real time. Like that can be used against you in a lot of different ways. And it just, the hyperfixation of it, like maybe we're more fixated on it now than we've ever been. Like, I don't know if that's just my bias, what I follow online but I think it is important, and it's to this story and to really Ottessa's overall body of work too, right? Like the beauty is a big part, and I guess kind of female coded to some extent, but it's becoming more not just female either, because there's a lot of men that put a lot of effort into that, the fillers that men are getting in their faces, and hair transplants, and I do know a little bit about, yes, like the kind of manosphere stuff with you see these men, who's taking steroids, who isn't, all the actors with great bodies and blah blah blah, yes, they're all taking steroids or testosterone injections. Like it just, there is like this emphasis on the beauty, but it's supposed to look effortless. The one everybody gives a hard time to, I guess, is Chris Hemsworth, because he has that like diet plan when he plays Thor.
I'm so disconnected. I don't even know about.
He just has like an app and like a fitness diet app that he put out with his name on face on it, and it's like, oh, this is my workout, this is my diet. But he doesn't mention that he's also cycling like with steroids while he's doing his prep for Thor or whatever. So, oh, you can look just like Chris Hemsworth. Well, you can't unless you're cycling and have a doctor doing your blood work every 2 weeks, like, and all. Yeah. Otherwise you're going to give yourself a heart attack or whatever it is. But yeah, just that idea of it being because it is an asset too. I think that's the thing that people right now, we maybe it's just the emphasis culturally with how we want to pretend that there's all this unfairness and stuff going around, but like being beautiful is an asset. I remember even the very first episode of this podcast, we did House of Mirth by Edith Wharton and Lily Bart, and that, like, the first time we meet her, she's obsessed with lines in her face and stuff. Like, just like, the beauty is an asset, but then it's also a burden because, you know, it doesn't last necessarily in that regard. And I guess the main character, the main protagonist for Ottessa's book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, was she supposed to be like around 26, 27, right?
26, 27, yes.
And I guess that's about when the first wrinkles start to set in on most people's faces. And then, like,
Gosh,
so,
yeah.
you know, we all kind of, if you're over 30, you know exactly what we're talking about, listeners. Like, it does come into play. And I like how it's referenced throughout the whole story, too, with the kind of, she catches a reflection of herself in, like, the big plate glass walking down the street. And just like, oh, I'm still beautiful, thank God. Yeah.
But I mean, I think the other thing that's reflected is just how hard the other characters mentioned work. Like, even her Wall Street boyfriend, you know, you can tell that he's not effortless at all. He has, like, everything in his place is contrived. It's set up to look a certain way. He has, like, a Patrick Bateman style regimen that, you know, gets kind of explored a bit. He's a major control freak. And then her friend is trying so hard to fit into a culture that at first I thought that, you know, maybe the protagonist is projecting on Reva, but then like, okay, like maybe this is like, I remember feeling this way about my friends, and I had my own like little 6-month period of rest and relaxation where, you know, I was feeling down, and I felt like a lot of my good friends who tried to help me were just, you know, dispensing therapy speak, like, oh, it's going to be okay. But it's like, what else do you expect me to do? Like, when you give them problems or you want to tell them like what's going on with you and you're honest, like, you can't expect much more than that. But what I was going to say was, I didn't see, like, when Reva is, you know, constantly like plucking her eyebrows or she's bulimic and throwing up, she's trying really, like, it's almost painful to watch her efforts.
Right.
You know, the only person that you don't see, or like, you see the protagonist's like efforts to sleep, but you don't really see her fail much.
Right.
Yeah.
And that does carry the story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about, the relationship between Reva and the main character, and kind of the projections and kind of what Reva is supposed to show us, and kind of the comparison to the main character, where we have the main girl. And yeah, like you said, Reva is like stopping in the middle of their kind of wine chatting sessions and just start doing crunches on the floor, you know, like in her dress, like her like work dress, you know. And listeners know, like, work clothes are not conducive to working out, right? You're going to tear seams. They're not good for movement, blah, 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 especially doing crunches on a floor in like a form-fitting dress or whatever. It's not possible, but yeah. And that's like funny. And then, we're constantly made to see how effortless the main character is, just still beautiful. And then the Reva's constantly reminded how jealous she is of it. Like, she's like, oh, you lost some weight, you know, you lost some weight because you're not eating or whatever. Like, oh, I hate you. Like, I hate that you lost weight, you know. And I think it does capture that little bit of I guess it depends how much you let it affect you, but there is kind of a natural jealousy or competitiveness between friend groups or whatever, whether that's attractiveness or skill or whatever it is, you know, or just natural talent or something. Like, there is like a level of envy in all interpersonal relationships, I guess, but then friendships especially, there is kind of a comparison that you make. You're constantly comparing yourself to your peers and who you're around. But yeah, I love that was really emphasized in terms of like the beauty that, and I've seen some reviews where the character's self-obsession with her beauty, the main character, is used against this book or used against Ottessa or something, like, just to criticize it in a way that I think isn't fair.
I've seen those too, and what I was going to say, it's kind of controversial. I think that, you know, now we live in Reva's culture. You know, we never really knew what the protagonist culture was because no one really bothered to look behind the curtain, or if we did, you know, we just kind of disregarded it because she had so many different advantages. But I think now, I mean, like, I think somewhere on page 57, she writes, when Reva gave advice, it sounded as though she were reading from a bad made-for-TV movie script. I think that's sort of what's going on now with some of these, like, Instagram infographics or the popularization of therapy speak. I'm not downing therapy. I think therapy's great. I'm not, a mental health professional. I think that, you should be open and upfront with your friends. But I just kept thinking about that, where that sort of criticism of Ottessa and her work sounds like it could have come out of the mouth of Riva reviewing this book, where you read this book and that's the only theme that jumps out at you. You don't like the effortless prose that obviously took a long time to perfect. You don't like the effortless characterization and of a culture that very few people maybe understand or want to be a part of. And so that's the thing that you choose to focus on, and you choose to wrap it in that sort of critique.
Right. Yeah, and it's always about, because then it becomes about something that isn't in the book, right? Like it starts to become about like a judgment outside of the book, outside of the character, outside of the writer, and comparing it to a culture of today, even when this book is set in a culture 20 years ago. But yeah, speaking of bad reviews, I wanted to get to like the villains of the story. Would you say there are any villains in this story, or
protagonist? I really think that's something I also noticed about some of the reviews. They're I think it kind of points to how people read books now, where it's I hated everybody in the book. Everybody's terrible. There was not one person I liked. It's well, maybe you weren't supposed to like them. You were supposed to maybe feel some painful pangs of recognition. Maybe I certainly did, and with everybody. But I think, I was going to say the protagonist is the villain. No, I think it's everybody, and everyone has a certain villainous quality. And you kind of see those qualities manifested even in the culture of the 2000s. If Riva is the self-improvement cult, the diet culture, the constant therapy speak to wrap things up, and that, was perverted in today's culture, what is the protagonist? I mean, there's so many things. What do you think her main, I guess, villainous aspects are? What do you think she represents?
Yeah, that kind of, I guess you could say selfishness in some way, where she's really, you could argue, I guess, that the main character is not caring about anybody around her, or even the people that are going out of their way to show her that they care, like Riva, but yeah, that, and then you have Trevor has some villainous aspect, I guess, but it is, I think it's a good way that Ottessa made this too, with how every character does have these kind of very unlikable traits, and everybody has them. Nobody's off limits. Even she's suspicious about the Egyptians at the bodega or whatever, and saying are they charging me for stuff I didn't buy? Are they saying I have a tab for money? Blah. Just everybody has those aspects in them, and we do tend to look at everything right now, especially with heroes versus villains, and I guess we could flip it and be oh, are there any heroes in this? And I guess not really.
I think that's another thing some people didn't like about it. People who kind of expect to read things that are black and white, or there are heroes or villains. There's no one was a hero, I don't think, at all, and everyone was a villain. Everyone kind of sabotaged themselves and others around them, inadvertently.
Yeah, and you do nobody gets their comeuppance, right? You would hope, and I think that's why Ottessa's purposely trying to subvert that expectation, I think, as a writer in a book like this, where you would expect, oh, she's letting this, weird artist guy, have her way with her while she's passed out and stuff. And you expect that to be humiliating or something when you get to the end. But then when you get to the end, it's just kind of oh, nobody really cared. She wasn't actually humiliated from it, and everything worked out actually. And that's it. I guess you could say it's a realism where bad people don't necessarily get their comeuppance. They don't necessarily, the real world is complicated, and there's people that are, I even maintain all the people that would shit on Ottessa for being morally inferior or saying that she had awful characters that nobody likes and there's no heroes. It's just because, people don't like to think of themselves as being bad people, even though everybody has traits that makes them. Sometimes, nobody is perfect. Even Jerry Falwell or these fucking Christians that hold themselves up to be, whatever, untouchables or something. Of course they have stuff. They're humans, they have bad things they do. They're mean to people. They mistreat people. They look at porn, they fuck prostitutes, and it just, yeah.
The above, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody does this, and that's the problem, I guess, with the purity politics, and that's why everybody gets kind of upset when they, you start getting accused of certain shit, because they're like, well, what you act like you're so pure, you're gonna come after me or something because I made this, like, I did this one very human thing. But I don't know. I guess, yeah, I guess to be fair to some of those criticisms, I guess I would say like a one criticism I would lay would be like, yeah, there isn't a whole lot to latch onto for some of the characters because the chain of events are not, it's much more literary in that sense. There isn't like a cause and effect chain of events that kind of like a standard book would have. And you're allowed to do this in literary fiction. You're allowed to change that up and not have a chain of events and just kind of have a character studies type book where you're just following a character around through day-to-day interactions. And I think people beat her up for that. And maybe there are some scenes, yeah, there was a point where I did find myself even being like, yeah, I guess I could use a little motivation for why she's doing this. But at the same time, like, I wouldn't beat up somebody like Ottessa or this book for something like that, because I just, myself, I would feel like it's unfair. But
raw and it's human. I think like what we were saying before, none of the unsavory aspects are cleaned up. And I think we were even talking about this before. I think it immediately sticks out now because this is what our entire discourse is about. But what you were saying about the Egyptians is like she never says the bodega. Like after a while, I was like, oh, I went down to the Egyptians again, and then like I think that they're like stealing my money. Oh yeah, no, I went to go get more coffee for the Egyptians, and then there was like that short squat one. It's like she is racist a bit, and that's okay because I mean everyone has a bit of that in them, and it's the same thing when like she starts speculating like in the middle where it's like I wonder if Riva feels this way because I am a WASP and she is a Jew, so of course like
very much the discourse, yeah,
and like the explicitness about like I have to wonder like what some absolutely like ridiculous is. Say you were writing, I guess, a book about this, like, and I mean, a review about this, and you were trying to censor some sort of grievance. What would you make about all the Whoopi Goldberg shit? Like, I don't know. Like, I kept thinking about that while I was reading. Like, how would somebody try and like spin this or portray it if they were writing a critical essay about my year of rest and relaxation?
It would be like some form of like accusations of like fetishizing or like race fetishizing or something with and it is interesting because like especially the Riva stuff where she's constantly referring to the fact that Riva's like Jewish, and because of that there's like not just the cultural things but the features that she deals with, and then I guess Riva brings it up all the time too, right? Like, see, like I didn't even know what the fuck a WASP was, and like everybody throws that term around all the time on like social media. And
most who do are not even. It's so funny to like see like what they narrow it down to too. There is, I guess for those listening, there's a right-wing think tank called the Claremont Institute, and one of their fellows who, to be fair, does a lot of good work. Even if I disagree with it, he does quite a bit of great research. Was talking about, he's like, how many, like we've only had 2 presidents who are true WASP founding. So I was like, well, who were they? And it was like Washington and somebody else. I was like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Like he didn't count the Bushes in there. He was like, this is what happens when we talk about demographic replacement. I was like, what are you talking about? What is your definition? If the Bushes don't fit it, and then apparently, like, okay, Reagan was Irish. I kept kind of going back and trying to figure out like what his rubric for this was, for this label everyone wants to apply to themselves if they are, a white Protestant. I was like, I don't know what your qualifications are.
Yeah, what does WASP stand for listeners that don't know? Because I know not everybody listening will. Yeah.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but then Bill Clinton is not a WASP. It's just like it's a intersection of usually it's New England, but not always. It can also be the coastal South. And I mean, it's an intersection of that, and then a special culture that sometimes circles around prep schools. And I'd say that people are trying to kind of like flesh it. It's more than that, but I think people are trying to kind of flesh it out more.
Right.
Like my mom is a WASP, but then not really. Not if you apply like the true selected definition. And she's really not if you apply the Claremont guy's definition, which I still can't understand.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, it's because, again, it's because when you get reductive to a certain point, sometimes reduction can help us categorize things to talk about, and especially in fields like sociology, psychology, whatever. But like, there is a point when you start to get to like the kind of, you hit that rock bottom where it's just like, okay, how useful is it to keep reducing at this point? You know, to keep reducing by group, by subgroup, by type, you know, like it does, especially when you talk about things like art and stuff, it doesn't become very useful. Like, it starts to get useless very quickly, I think, when you start reducing or reducing people down to these, yeah. But it was funny to me because it's one of those terms that I had never heard in my fucking life. And then social media discourse kept shoving it in my face. And then it's popping up in books like this all of a sudden. And then if you look
never
for
heard
it, no, yeah. And then because I've never really, like, until the kind of social media took over the world, like I never knew, like I never paid attention to any of this stuff. Like I never paid attention to any of this type of discourse on who's a WASP, who isn't. Like, it was so foreign to me that people were having these debates. But then when you look into it a little bit, that you can go back 100 years, people talking about that term almost like in the 50s, like.
I think people tried to kind of like, bury it in the 2000s. Like, I don't know if you read Tad Friend's Cheerful Money, but, he is a WASP, and he's talking as like people, it was sort of just, it sounded like I didn't like the book that much because it felt like he was apologizing too much for his upbringing. I felt it was self-indulgent, but it was a good book at the same time. And I think part of it, like, that unique is it came out in 2008, 2009, and people were just very certain. They're like, WASP culture is dead. And if you were someone who didn't hear it a lot, it's like, well, what are you talking about, WASP culture? But it's not. Like, the aesthetics of it, and like there was a bit of resurgence of it in Obama's first term. Even like the Obamas themselves kind of modeled themselves on some of like those like stereotypical quote unquote culture markers. Right. And I have to wonder, yeah. And then it's the same thing. Even I don't know. Do you remember when you?
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, jerk shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
It was like, it's demeaning and anti-Semitic to talk about like a typical like Long Island Jew. Like people were like, you shouldn't stereotype Jewish women this way. Like, do you remember that discourse? And then here's a walking, living stereotype with like all the things where it's like, even reading it was like, this is a familiar person to me, but I also know these are all these rude stereotypes that were supposed to be outmoded by now.
Right. That's always funny when you hear stereotypes, like, oh, stop stereotyping, and then you go to like an area or whatever where that stereotype, and you just see the stereotype everywhere you turn in. And what really makes people upset is just pointing it out. Like, yeah, and I think that's important too, because I think this is why people romanticize that early 2000s kind of turn of the century, is because we did feel culturally, it felt like we were at a point where you could just say these things and just and nobody was jumping to that conclusion that like you were saying this because of some hatefulness in your heart or anything. You're just talking with friends, and everybody had friends that were from all over the fucking place, and it was just a part of it. And we were like, oh yeah, that's like the Chappelle show, like the jokes that would be made and stuff like that at that time. Like,
it was a sign of trust. It meant that you really cared about these people. Yeah. You're only, stiflingly polite to strangers. If you're my friend, I'm going to make fun of you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's yeah. All right. So I did want to ask you, this question came up as I was reading it. We did chat a little bit about this when we were preparing for this episode, where, is this a chick lit book, would you say?
Okay. I kind of would say yes in a way, but I'd say it's a good kind of chick lit. Like I love chick lit, I do, but this is a very different kind because of what we were talking about. Nobody gets their comeuppance, you know. The prose is very different. She styles things differently. Just the way it's structured, it's like not traditional chick lit, but
Right.
it kind of throws. But I'd say I don't know. I'd say in a way it is, in that it has like the same power as chick lit, and it's probably being passed around and shared amongst friends. But it's it's a little different. It's not just like something that you pick up to feel comforted by. You know, if you read this, you're like, even the reviews say it's like, I'm still thinking about this book. I was so disturbed by it. You know, like it's lodged into my brain and I can't stop thinking about that, like all of these gruesome scenes that she paints. You know, that's not chick lit. Chick lit is kind of supposed to give you solace. But I do think that I'd say that this is women's literary fiction. I'd say that if you are a woman and you love fiction and you love great prose, like this is probably what you're going to gravitate to. And I maybe put Sally Rooney in that category too.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and like probably Rachel Cusk before her, and yeah, Edith Wharton before her. I don't know what you would call that category. I wouldn't call it chick lit, but it's something
Right.
that women read and women relate to.
It is. It's weird for me too, and I wanted to ask you this too, because yes, like people did not. I remember before all this shit happened, before the kind of last 10 years that we've been living through with the cultural kind of chaos and bullshit. When I was in undergrad, studying literature in undergrad and things like that, it was very common. Like we even talked about masculine and feminine rhyme, right? Like there were end rhymes to things that we categorized in these ways, and there is this kind of masculine and feminine. It's subtle, but it is sometimes useful. I think people can overemphasize it, but it is sometimes useful to talk about from female perspective, male perspective. You know, can the female writers write a good male perspective? Can the male writers write a good female perspective? Like, so it does matter in that regard, I think. But you know, it used to just be accepted that there were some genres or some styles, ways of writing that just spoke more to one sex or the other. I always talk about how Vonnegut is kind of a very masculine, male-oriented writer, and men tend to like him more than women do, you know, like as a writer and his fiction and all that. Maybe DFW is one of those too, as we were talking.
He is, yeah.
And so, but recently it has become more of a, oh, you're not supposed to mention that. You're not supposed to talk about how this resonates with one, you know, sex more than the other or whatever, or it hits that's something inside them that makes them really drawn to it. And it is unique to their sex, how they grew up, how they see the world, you know, how men and women see sex quite differently, you know, like quite differently actually. But I wanted to ask just because I got a little bit of that sense, whereas something for me, there were like, and I'd mentioned this to you when we were chatting, like I understand why men or a lot of men are like, oh, fuck that book, or oh, fuck the Ottessa or whatever. I do understand where that comes from. But I did want to ask, because I would say, yeah, it's kind of, women's literary fiction, but it's a little bit more than that. It's reaching outside of just that strict, narrow, this is only for, you know, women that like literary fiction. It's going broader. It's not just that. So I don't want to, like, you know, we're not saying this, listeners, to like denigrate the book or anything, but I think it is something that we mentioned, you know, Ottessa, great American writer, happens to be a woman. Of course she's writing about this from this perspective and stuff like that. So, yeah, and I think you're right. I think you're right. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that all the women in like, the way that women are shown to be so awful to one another in the story, like how much they're like judging each other all the time, and like the friends undermining one another. Even just the way she talks about Riva, like she keeps her around like this little pet to make herself feel better.
No, right. It's like, oh, like her prattling on is comforting. But I guess, you know, like for someone like what I said, I was kind of recovering from my own physical ailments at the time. And, you know, it's a mindset that you kind of get into when you're already there. Like you're already cut off from the world a bit, or you've already kind of poured yourself out for recovery. And, you know, you're not seeing your friend's human qualities. It's like, oh my God, she's talking to me. I can like distract myself from things, you know? So it was like the way that she, you know, treats her like a pet or like something to lean on. I think that's like a lot of people who she's tranked up, she's doped up, and that's kind of what it is. Like, you're numb.
Right.
And there was a part when she was walking up like First Avenue, and like everything is just still, and there are no thoughts running through her brain. And I wouldn't say that that scene kind of felt familiar to me, not because of like, oh my, like I was like loaded up on drugs doing it, but when you're already out of it, or you're already in a different state of mind, everything just kind of like flows by you, kind of like what she was talking about, like a car's headlights kind of like passing over you.
Right.
Nothing really happening. Your friends are talking, everything's just like fading into the background. It's an entire distraction, like, because you're so focused on you and your own healing.
Yeah, it's so true too. Like, it's so, I remember thinking this with, other books that I've read too, where like there's characters that when you're reading through the novel, and at first when they first get introduced, and you're like, oh, that's not me at all, I hate that person or whatever, and then as you get further and further in, you're like, okay, maybe it is a little bit like me, the kind of, it's literally me meme or whatever that everybody shares, right? Like, yeah, there is something to that. And I always say that when the it's literally me meme is touching that universality that we always want out of art, like the kind of, it touches the human condition, like just a baseline that everybody feels, it touches that, and then we're like, oh, it's me. It's like, yeah, it is, because you're a human being that lives in the world, and so you are feeling these, just like the protagonist, just like Riva, like all these other characters, even Trevor, right? Like, you don't like to admit, I think people probably don't want to admit that they're more like Trevor than they think. I'm a very anal person, like I like things this way, or I get kind of like, that, no, it goes right here. Like, this is the proper place for it.
I think people just like a lot of it. And I think this is one thing that I really liked about Ottessa's book. And then, before her, Margaret Atwood with Cat's Eye and The Robber Bride, is that, especially like when this came out, like right after Me Too, and right after like a lot of just, like gender wars all over the place, and talking about power dynamics, like sexual dynamics, it was kind of nice to see that women could also get up to no good and, be cutting. Like, I read this, and as I said, I related to it in some uncomfortable ways. Like, oh, like when I was in recovery, I treated my friends pretty terribly. Like, I shouldn't have treated them like distractions. They're like, oh, that was how I thought. I was self-censored, and I couldn't make my commitments because I wasn't able to see things for what they were. Or if I'm Riva, like, I'm insecure, and I bought into a culture that, values things that don't really matter. Like, I think a lot of the people who are like, I couldn't relate to this at all, it's like, no, I think what actually happened was it hit some painful points of recognition the way art is supposed to, and
right.
You didn't like it. You didn't close the book and feel satisfied. You closed it and felt unnerved. And I think, she went for it there. That's how everyone felt, I think, after reading this a bit.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up the Me Too, because I think that's important too. And Ottessa, she doesn't overtly participate in the culture wars, but I think as part of the promo for this book, didn't she write that one essay in the Atlantic or something about how she used her sexuality to get what she wanted? It was basically just like a story about how she used her sexuality at school to get this professor to flirt with her, because she wanted his help on like her books and stuff, this older professor who thought she was hot. And for those that don't know, yeah, Ottessa's quite beautiful and all that, and which is a part of the It Girl stuff. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And just I remember she wrote that essay, and I think she did an interview with Bret Easton Ellis, and I like his podcast, so that's where I heard it. And it was kind of probably 2019, 2020, and she said in that interview, she's like, I wrote that essay because I was tired of seeing people like pretending women didn't have anything, like where women are all these helpless little people walking around. She's like, I wanted to write about a real thing that I did, where I used my sexuality, my beauty, to get what I wanted, like to manipulate men around me and get what I wanted. And I think maybe this book is even, subtle. I'm not saying she's overtly participating in it or anything like that, but it is a reaction to that, where you, especially when you came up in our generation, we weren't bombarded with this growing up like that. We weren't bombarded with like a Me Too level of hysteria, and we started to, we kind of saw through it, I guess. Like, some people started to see through it right away, where it's like, well, yeah, of course there's terrible things like the Weinstein stuff, but like, you know, it's more complicated than that. Like, it's much more complicated, and this book shows how complicated it is. Whereas, like, there is a level of
Absolutely.
attention seeking, and there, you know, people say, oh, it's terrible. Yeah, it is, but like in the moment, that little bit of comfort is required. So you put yourself in a position to get the love and affection, and then after it's over, you know, you feel terrible for it or whatever, and that's very real. And you know, she captures it here. Yeah, and it's not the end of the world, you know, feeling terrible at the end of it. It kind of, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to go off that route, but yeah, definitely.
No, I know she does it over and over and over again. And I mean, I think like we were just saying, it is refreshing to see that, because for a while you just feel like, I think it's like she, the protagonist, even though she's like many shades of awful, she kind of is an adult about this stuff. Like, she knows what she's doing. Like, she knows that she's doing this to herself and to others, and she, you know, like, plainly admits it.
And she knows exactly how to get Trevor to come to her apartment when she wants. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
I always think of that. Yeah, like people that are in long-term relationships, you know this too. Like, yeah, exactly how to get the spouse to do what you want. Like, yeah, just absolutely.
And there's this whole like subplot with Riva and Ken, who is, you know, her boss at work, and they're having an affair. And, you know, not once do we talk about the morality of it or like the different power dynamics. There's no even an indication that, like, you know, he's in the wrong or anything. The only thing is, like, she invites him to her mother's funeral, which, you know, I would say that's odd, but, you know, she is like, there's no comment or judgment on that. She doesn't anyway. He shows up with his wife, and then, you know, you skip through a little bit of the book and you see that, you know, he obviously got her pregnant. He got her pregnant, and like, there's no even deliberation about it. It's like, I'm going to, you know, of course I'm not going to keep the baby. Like, he's promoting me. It's just like, it's all over now, whatever. And I don't know, you don't see any judgment on anyone. Like, you don't see Riva take responsibility, because it really wasn't her fault, but there's no like indication that it's his fault for taking advantage of her either. Like, it's clearly a relationship between two adults who shouldn't be doing what they're supposed to be. Yeah. Like, they shouldn't be doing it at all, but there's no clear, you know, value judgment on what they're doing.
Right. And I think that this, some other people have talked about it, and I guess since the Me Too has calmed down, since, you know, the height of it, but people pretend that isn't like an appealing thing, the power dynamic, that isn't hot, right? like
But that's what they say about, like, you know, like with Trevor and the protagonist too. It's like, you're reading that at first, I was like, oh my God, like, this is awful, this is terrible, you know, this is abuse. And then you get further and it's like, okay, like, you see now, you, like, you know, he was, of course, if you're a young girl, and like, you can see that it was mutual. You know, like, she was feeding it back to him, and like, everyone who was involved in her life at the time was like, no, this is great. You know, like, he has so much charm, so much charisma. Look at all that he's doing for you. You know, you're like, you know, hot shit for bagging an older guy. All of that. Yeah, nobody is saying, you know, judging her for what she's doing whatsoever.
And I think people also underestimate there is a power level to that. There is a power level, especially if you're the woman in the position having an affair with a married man, you know, with his career and his family. You could snap of your fingers, blow that up. Maybe not in the early 2000s there. Maybe people wouldn't treat it like they would now. But
no, not in the 2000s. Yeah.
But there is a little bit of, you can dangle this thing over that person now. Like, there's, you know, equal manipulation on both sides, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, or make a point about, at least. But there is, so somebody like Riva, I guess, would you say it's more of like the kind of striver class thing where this is happening more, like, you like, or that type of affair?
What do you mean?
Well, like that type of affair with the boss, and then having to keep it a secret for both careers, for your own career and for the boss's. I don't know. I guess we just hear about it more in the upper world, the striver world, maybe.
I think we just hear about it more in general because, you know, before people, it just wasn't considered important, or it was just something that happened if you were in certain industries. And I think that's what Me Too was trying to correct, and it just went a little bit off the rails, is, you know, stuff like this did happen. And even though Riva and, you know, Ken, her boss, were two consenting adults, you
Right.
do like, you do see things like, all right, well, he got her pregnant and he's just kind of, I'm going to send you over to the Twin Towers so I don't have to deal with you. Like, please
Right.
go away now.
Right.
Like, things, but, I think one thing that you do see, and I've talked about this a lot, and I actually, over at my bosses or like my client Substack, like we wrote about one of the Cuomo accusers. So, there were many accusations levied against him, and this is only about one of his accusers. The one who, like, she went to Hamilton College and she had a history of falsely accusing men. Like, she wanted to be an activist. And
Right.
when her texts were like, so, the person that she falsely accused in Hamilton brought receipts, like, and he was vindicated in court. But then with Cuomo, the same thing kind of happened. So text messages were leaked and they were kind of a bit hard to parse. At first I was like, okay, like there might be something going on here, but it also was like, oh, like what did he do today? It's like, and he was like, oh, he complimented me for having my hair up in a bun, like, can you believe it? And like she's planning this, and it's like, oh, like, and like her, the person she's texting was like, oh, you're my hero, like you're gonna do this, and she's like, yeah. And like, it's become like a form. I think maybe they're using it as like a form of empowerment, or they're calling it that, or they're calling it revenge. But I think that you are seeing this more because it's a reaction to like what's depicted in the book. Not one person was like, hey, do you think this is kind of bad for you? Or like, nobody intervened at all. Like, you don't see family being like, I don't know about this guy. Like, you don't see her sorority sisters being like, oh, like, I think this is kind of off. So like absolutely nobody, pointed out what was, or like even showed concern about their respective relationships. And like Reva's talking to the protagonist, and of course, like she's like tranked out, like about to go to sleep and like chugging coffees, and she's like, oh yeah. I mean, like, whatever. Okay. Like, not once does she say, hey, I think you should break up with that guy. Like,
Right.
you're gonna screw yourself, you're going to be hurt. So I think that also could be like what happened with Me Too. Like, this was so accepted, and not one person, in the two, it was a part of rock culture. Like, not one person said anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And you could think of all the stuff that goes around now. We look back on it now. Yeah.
I think like the bottles and bottles age of the early 2000s. Like, I think I forgot who wrote about it recently, but I mean, yeah, you could get away with murder. You could
Right.
be a Howard. Yeah. So I think that is what Read 2 was in reaction to. But then now it's currency. Instead of like, oh, look at this like hot older guy I bagged, you might also be, deteriorating my life, and I might also be a victim of abuse. So I don't care. Nobody's pointing it out. It's now like, look at all these scalps that I've taken.
Right. Yeah.
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 Especially even in the lit world, I hate to say.
Oh yeah. 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 It's it's changing. I don't like to overemphasize it because I think a lot of people do overemphasize how they exaggerate how bad it is or whatever. There's, oh, it's so censorious, it's so terrible. It's like, well, no, it isn't. We're still in America here. We're in the 21st
Yes.
century, but there are a few things. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing. I think we're starting to see it swing a little bit back towards reasonableness, or not the extreme side of everything being so extreme. But we'll see. Yeah. And I mean, that's always going to happen. It always goes in waves and pendulum swings and things like that. But the medicines, particularly like the 20th century, 21st century, the medicines and how important they are in the book, and like, the crazy
Oh, for
therapist,
sure.
and just like, what do we think of that, or like the role that the medicines play in the story, and then even, broader characterization or anything like that. Yeah.
I think that also is just, a really good, accurate estimate of that era. I remember, you hear about it a lot now, maybe because people are realize they made a mistake. But I have adult ADHD, but I do remember, it wasn't until I was an adult I was diagnosed. I remember, in our era, it was like, if you were a rambunctious boy, you had ADHD. You go down to the school nurse's office and you're given a recommendation, and then you're taking a test and you have, you're on Ritalin now. You don't have to have rules applied to you. You have a problem. And I think it was like that too with certain SSRIs, where it's like, you need a quick fix, you need to get on with your life. And like, I'm not downing antidepressants here. I think like a lot of modern medicine has done great things for people, but I think like, yeah, like that kind of doctor shopping, or just like, okay, like we have all these great tools at our disposal, like now in the 21st century, let's use them. I think even like, um, it didn't feel like an old, even though it's like, very much, very 2000s, it didn't feel like an old characterization to me. I think just now we're starting to see a reversal with that. I don't know if it came after 2020 or what, but, at the point in time, it was like, yeah, it was very easy to get whatever medications you wanted. And that was always the first step.
Oh yeah. And I think the comparison you make is absolutely correct, where this was the beginning of it. And it's reason that it's in the early 2000s here, year 2000, the late 90s. This is when the kind of overuse of opiates, the overprescribing of opiates was happening. We invented, these new diagnoses were coming for children, especially on boys. I remember at that time, my brother and I both were like taken to these therapists, and they said, "Oh, you have ADD or you have ADHD." It's like, I don't, but apparently, but I was on medicine for it in 6th grade or whatever. Like it was just this. It was starting to be I guess the happy pill time or whatever, right? Like the kind of,
yeah. And do you remember the happiness research that came out around that time? I think it was debunked, like a lot of it, but it was like, it was a lot of it really was like, what was it? What's the book that, like, how to like double your energy, and what's the name of that? Yeah, like it was like that, but it was with pills. And it all seemed like a novelty,
Take these pills, yeah. Go to a crazy therapist, the doctor shopping, yeah. I guess we didn't even talk about the therapist or anything, yeah, like the kind of, and how she manipulates the therapist too, like how
and the therapist doesn't remember any of the personal details. Like she has like this massive file, but she doesn't remember how her parents died.
Yeah. And there's,
but I didn't think that I didn't even think she was manipulating. I thought it was like the therapist was in on the game, because I think even those psychiatrists still exist, and like they're slowly, like more and more this is coming to light, but it's like, we know what you're here for. So it's like, oh, what's going on? Okay, you're still sleeping badly. Okay, here you go. Like, I know how to get past the insurance companies,
Right,
I have like you have to pay me a hefty fee, and so keep cutting. Like I don't think that she was deluding Dr. Tuttle at all. I think Dr. Tuttle was wacky and kind of knew what she was doing.
Right. The kind of, even out, it's I live in a state, well, I guess you live in a state now too, with the legal marijuana and what's happening in the States, and you look at these like medical cards that they issued, like to get a medical card in the state I live in, like you just go to like quacks, like you just go to these quack like fake doctors that have like a little thing in a shopping center, and they just give you the thing, you pay the fee, and they license you for the medicine. Like, it's the same thing. Like every industry that pops up, there's always going to be the kind of pill shoveling kind of doctors that don't really, what other medications are you taking? Oh, it doesn't matter. They just keep giving it to you.
No, right. And then even if it's like a well-meaning doctor, when I was kind of recovering and had my little like 6 months, I was seeing a psychiatrist who threw a lot of different pills at me, but it wasn't because he was like, I was doctor shopping, or because he was trying. It was just like, oh my God, you're in so much pain. What are we going to do?
Right.
Here's maybe this off-label prescription that will help with physical pain. Like, we're not going to talk about the mental issues it might give you. Like, here's this, try mixing this together. Like, let's just, like it's an urgency thing. It's a do something impulse. And I think we're seeing that more and more, and like the pitfalls of that more and more, where it's like, fix this now.
Right.
And the only way you can fix something immediately now is it's like, okay, like take this, vial of pills, do it.
And it is presented with kind of without judgment, like everything else in the book, which I think makes it so interesting, is that it is without judgment. It's just kind of, this is what happens. This is just what I'm doing. And the doctor too is just, And maybe there's a little judgment in the descriptions of the doctor from the narrator's perspective, with the neck brace and the stains on the neck brace.
But I think it was more like, not to judge her for, for her, it wasn't moralism. It wasn't, right. It was more like, okay, here's this wacky person. Like, I could see The Office, like, just like through those vivid descriptions. Like, here's like this old therapist who has like this, crusty office on the Upper East Side, and has all this like old Victorian furniture in it from like the 60s or the 50s, like all these old antiques that she just dragged out of the basement. And her cats are all over the place. And, like she's wearing like sunglasses. It's like, like she's a type, like an old familiar type. But not once was it like, oh my God, she's a crook, or like, oh my God, like we're passing judgment on what she's doing. It was just like, okay, this person's crazy,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The last couple of questions I have, what did you make of the ending?
So it was shocking to me. So, I mean, I think to be quite honest, after, she finished her full year, I was kind of dragging where I was like, okay, so like now what happens? Like you're done. And
Right.
then like, yeah, like the Chinese artist is gone. Like what's going on now? And, she hits, but it makes sense. Like what happened on like that year on that day? And it makes sense that she wasn't zoned out for that. Like she wasn't tranked out on sleeping pills and that happened. She bought a VCR finally, like she got around to like replacing all her stuff. And for the one time that Riva isn't available to talk to her or visit her, she
Right.
died. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of the ending? What did you think?
I thought it was a good way to frame the year, like of her, the actual year of rest and relaxation around the vent. Uh, and I guess it's the only way you could end a book like this where you don't have a great, or at least a very obvious shift in the character or the story. It's not wrapped up with a little bow. It's actually wrapped up with this kind of tragedy that, and I knew the reputation of the book enough to know that what was coming, because I knew it was centered around that. But just because I always see reviews and stuff of it. But yeah, I didn't mind it that much. I my first initial instinct, I was like, did she earn that ending? But that was just like my writer brain going like kind of like,
Yeah,
it felt a little abrupt. But I think,
it's very abrupt, but in a way it worked.
yeah,
That
the way it was
only
going,
happened.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was working towards that anyway. So yeah, and I think that it's if you would have told me when I was a kid and the 9/11 happened that this was going to be something that we're still talking about, and
Yeah.
still using as a thing for fiction and all that, and I never would have thought that. I guess it was kind of the worst terrorist attack of them all. I guess that's why we remember it, and I guess it was just so shocking and like what when that happened and all, we were kids. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that that's becoming a huge trope in a lot of books and a lot of writing, this kind of moment in, I guess especially New York was the big one. I wasn't living there at the time when that was happening. I guess that was just incredibly shocking, probably, like living in the actual city where everything was covered in dust, blocks away, and all that. And
For sure.
yeah, but it just, yeah, it's interesting that this historical moment when we were all kids when it happened, and now we're all like writing books about it. People are like,
I
writing.
think, I don't know. I used to kind of feel that way myself, where it's like, why is, but I think, people say that was truly the end of the 90s. Like it didn't really end until 2001. And that when you look at the culture that preceded it, I think people try to trace that back to the terrorist attack. I don't know how to, connect the Zeitgeist of the 2000s to what happened on that day. I'm not talking about politics either. I'm just talking
Right.
about culture and like what we saw in the book, like what was beginning to emerge. I don't know how to tie that back to 9/11, but I think that's where a lot of people point to. It's like it all really began after that day.
Yeah, and it became real. Like it became before there was no danger associated with kind of us getting more and more raunchy, more and more kind of wild in the culture and things. And then, there were terrorist attacks all through the 90s at very, even the World Trade Center, right? The famous one they tried to do in the 90s with the car bomb in the parking garage beneath it and stuff. But this was the one that was successful, brought those huge iconic towers down to the ground, right? And like, it just became real. And then, yeah, you have, the Patriot Act comes into play. So now the freedoms that everybody enjoyed for a century are now gone, that the government taking that up and stuff. But yeah.
I think we got raunchier after 9/11, actually. I don't think that, I don't know. It was like we had like it was the start of purity culture, I think, in like some like evangelical circles and stuff. But it's because like the mainstream culture was out of control, and then that's what the 2010s were in reaction to,
Right.
or yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds exactly right. Any final thoughts on my year in wrestling relaxation or Ottessa, Sam?
I'd say that I think that she's it's a start of a positive trend. I'd say even the article about Lit It Girls, it kind of nailed why this book resonated with so many. and why there were so many negative reactions to it. Like it girls don't really wade into culture war nonsense, not often. They're kind of mysterious. They keep the focus on their work, and even though she's working and like doing certain marketing, gimmicks with fashion houses and whatnot, it's a very different sort than what we've seen before. I think that, I think it's going to be the start of just like a revitalization of good women's literary fiction. I forgot like how great this book was until I reread it before talking to you. I don't know. It's different. It's not just like for your solace. It doesn't reaffirm your priors. It startles you. It leaves you thinking for hours, days, and that's what good books do. That's what they're supposed to do. So I think if you want to read to be surprised, to be shocked, to really like feel raw emotions, to look at like grief up close, like without it being papered over, this is what it is. There's a reason why she's so successful.
Absolutely. I love that. And Sam is 100% right. Sam, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people find your stuff and your editing services and all that? Where would you want people to find you?
So go ahead and send me. I mean, right now I'm working on getting my website set up again. Like we're going through like under construction, but at the moment, I mean, you can reach out to me, and you can also see a lot of my editing work on Michael Tracy's Substack. I'm proud to work for him.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Sam.
Of course.
And this has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored,
Some activities are intentional, right?
it shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.